Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, in today's class, I'm going to continue with Amartya Sen's capability approach, and I will try and finish this chapter. So, in the last class, we had gone ahead and we had seen how there is inequality that exists among the people who live in America, right? Although they are not relatively, they're not absolutely poor, but there is still some inequality that exists. हमने उसके बारे में बात की थी. Today, I want to go ahead and I want to continue from there. And I want to talk about some other aspects today. And the first one that we want to go ahead and we want to pick up, that is going to be, it is going to go ahead and talk about the inequality in respect to India and sub-Saharan Africa. The poverty with respect to India and sub-Saharan Africa. So the topic title is going to be Poverty and Deprivation in India and sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. See, why are we focusing on these two countries specifically? Because it is assumed. And agar there is this paper written by Jean Dries. If we look into that paper also, he said that these two countries are the countries with the lowest level of income, with the lowest level of life expectancy, with the highest level of poverty. So that is why it is a good analysis to understand the two countries. So please write down. According to 1991 study by Jean Dries, it is good to remember some of the important papers. Just as Jean Dries is a very big name in the field of development economics. So to remember his name is always a good idea. South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa have, first, they have the among the lowest level of per capita income in the world. तो अगर हम पूरे वर्ल्ड के कंपैरिजन में इनका इनकम देखें इन दो कंट्रीज का, तो लोएस्ट लेवल ऑफ पर कैपिटा इनकम एग्जिस्ट करता है, राइट? एंड इफ आई लुक at the entire sub-Saharan African countries, so we will see that there are 46 out of 52 countries where the life expectancy is below 60 years. Okay. So if I include, actually in 46 countries, if I go ahead and include whole of South Asia, except Sri Lanka, which had a good life expectancy, but if I include whole of South Asia, if I include the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa, right? Except Zimbabwe, South Africa, and few more countries, it is seen that 46 out of 52 countries had a very low life expectancy. Life expectancy was below the age of 60, which is not considered to be a good life expectancy. Okay. अब क्या है ना कि if I talk in India itself, तो India में in itself there is a lot of inequality. माने in India within the states also you will go ahead and you will find that अच्छा, whenever I give this data ना, this data beta, this is based on the 1991 study. So this data may change, of course. India mein life expectancy is higher. It changes with time, है ना? But this data is according to the Jean Dries paper of 1991. इस बात को याद रखना, हाँ? Okay. Now, if I go ahead and I want to do a comparison, so we can go ahead and compare India and Sub-Saharan Africa. Again, I am comparing according to 1991 figure, because that is what Sen does in his paper. So India and Sub-Saharan Africa. And the first one that we take is population. तो देखो इंडिया का population is almost double that of Sub-Saharan Africa. This is 846.3 and this is 488.9. If we look at infant mortality rate, IMR, this is 80 in India. Okay? The highest infant mortality rate was seen in 1991 in Odisha, and it is 104 in Sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at adult literacy ratio in female versus male, right? So this is 39:64. Okay? Lowest female literacy ratio was in Rajasthan in India, and this is 40:63. Comparatively a little more than India, but overall बहुत ज़्यादा similar ही चल रहे हैं दोनों, है ना? Then if we look at life expectancy, so it was 60 in India and 52 in Sub-Saharan Africa. Median age of death, this is 37 in India. Median age of death means, when I talk about median, means when 50% of the people, so the value that divides it into 50% here and 50% there, right? That is median age, right? So this is a bit different from the average age. Remember, median में हम कह रहे हैं कि what is that number which divides 50% of the population on the right and 50% on the left. Average is when I take all the age at which people die and divide by the number of population. So the two things are a bit different, और ये थोड़ा सा different समझना जरूरी है. So when we go ahead and when we talk about the median age of people, then this is 37 in India, and this was 30 in Sub-Saharan Africa. If we talk about undernourishment, right? How many people are undernourished? So this is 40 to 60% of the people, and here it is 20 to 40% of the people, right? The another thing that we need to remember, however, is that in India, with all of this, we had less political and military turmoil, right? And there was absence of famines. However, when we talk about Sub-Saharan Africa, we had war, we had unrest, we had instability. So the situation in the two countries in this case was a bit different, right? So this is what population is, just the number in millions. In millions. Okay. So we see that although the two countries were very similar, right, with comparison to a lot of indicators, but दो चीजें याद रखनी है. पहले, the situation in the two countries was very different. And second and most important thing, that although we are talking about India as a whole, but some states in India were performing well and some states were performing worse, right? So it is not that all states were equally worse in India, right? So if I talk about the worst three Indian states, right, which were not performing well, then it was Odisha, MP, and UP, right? तो हमें ये समझना पड़ेगा in terms of infant mortality that when we talk about these indicators actually, these are the overall values, but they may be much, much better than sub-Saharan Africa when a particular state of India may be compared, right? Another thing which is important here is that, so let me just write this point first of all. So please write down that some states of India were not performing as badly as others, right? Another thing which is important here is something which is called as survival advantage. Survival advantage means why do we think that India will outperform itself? क्यों ऐसा होगा कि long run में India as compared to sub-Saharan Africa, it will do on an average significantly better. Why it will happen, right? So the author goes ahead and Amartya Sen has gone ahead and given two main reasons, and he has gone ahead and called this as the survival advantage reason. The first survival advantage reason is mortality. है ना? तो mortality में it has been seen that on an average Indians were living longer, और India में there were no war, there were no unrest, there was no economic decline, right? So India was doing better in that case. The second thing is that nutrition, right? India had much better nutritional facilities as compared to the sub-Saharan Africa, right? So these two things came to be known as the survival advantage. So please write down. There was an interesting contrast between India and sub-Saharan Africa in terms of two survival advantages, right? First, mortality, and second, nutrition. ठीक है, तो mortality में क्या? So mortality में I can just expand the point of mortality. India had much higher median and average life expectancy as compared to sub-Saharan Africa, right? So the age till which people were going ahead and they were living, that was much, much higher, right? The weighted average was much higher in India as compared to that of sub-Saharan Africa, right? There were countries in sub-Saharan Africa, many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where the median age was only 3 to 5 years. Imagine 50% of the population had the age at the breaking age, where 50% of the population died, was mere 3 to 5 years, right? That was a very premature mortality, and this was very sharp in Africa as compared to India. Africa में बहुत ज्यादा लोग थे जो 50% लोग थे जो within the age of 3 to 5 years who were dying, right? So there was occurrence of sharp premature mortality, right? That's the first thing. Now let's come to the second one. The second is undernutrition, right? Again, when we go ahead and we see the undernutrition fact, we see that India was always self-sufficient in food. India को खाने का दिक्कत कभी नहीं था, which was a problem in sub-Saharan Africa. So India had always been self-sufficient in food, right? And if we go ahead and we see, and I have already mentioned that in the table above, that undernourishment, it was 20 to 40% in India. See, we have already mentioned this. It was 20 to 40%. Oh, I have written it opposite. So please write down that the undernourishment in India, it was 40 to 60% in India, whereas it was only 20 to 40% in sub-Saharan Africa. Now try to understand this thing. So if I just look at these numbers, अगर मैं सिर्फ इन numbers को देखूं जो हमने ऊपर लिखे हैं, undernourishment in India seems more. यहाँ पे 40 to 60% है, right? And यहाँ पर 20 to 40% है, right? But we need to also understand that when we talk about being undernourished, right? जो India में it seems to be higher, India was still having domestically produced supply, right? India still had enough food, right? Although people were more, right? So therefore, there might have been undernourishment. They were not getting the enough nourishment that was required. Still, when we go ahead and when we look at the supply of food, the supply of food was much more in India. It was self-sufficient in India as compared to the supply of food in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So although in terms of numbers, statistically, we see more numbers in India, still we saw that India was self-sufficient in food and it did not rely on any other country for food. But there was another problem in India. And that problem in India, I think it still exists. That is called as gender bias death, right? So we see, and I think you will see it in a lot of families, that the women in India tend to live much more than the men in India. Now, this is what has been seen, right? So gender bias death is basically when one particular gender that dies more as compared to other gender, right? So this is something that has been again seen only in India. So please write down in India. Gender bias at death was prevalent, which was not seen in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. So now, so we have now seen certain things. क्या देखा हमने? That statistically speaking, India में undernourishment ज़्यादा देखा गया. But ये भी देखा गया कि India is self-sufficient in food. It itself is the supplier of food. और ये भी देखा गया कि इंडिया में जो एज है till which people live is much more than that of sub-Saharan Africa, where the age is only 3 to 5 years for most of the countries. So what we have done is we have seen that in some parts India is doing better than sub-Saharan Africa, and in some parts it was doing worse. So because of this, it becomes very hard to assert, to understand. ये समझना बहुत ही मुश्किल है, ये एक्सप्लेन करना बहुत ही मुश्किल है, क्योंकि किसी चीज में इंडिया बेटर कर रही है वहां से और किसी चीज में उससे वर्स कर रही है. तो ये समझाना बहुत ही मुश्किल होगा that which country has lower capability deprivation. Both of them were in 1991 among the worst, right? But अगर हम उन दोनों को एक दूसरे से कंपेयर करें, so it is hard to explain that which one of them had lower capability deprivation and which had more capability deprivation, right? And this is something which you can see from these numbers also. So ये numbers इतना close हैं to each other, right? You see that except population, when I go ahead and I compare these numbers, they are so close to each other that it is very difficult to understand कि कौन सी country ज्यादा खराब perform कर रही थी, right? So I'm just going to conclude this part. So please write down. Thus, it is hard to assert which country had lower capability deprivation, right?